Hi everyone, welcome to the Cafe Summer Series with the Pole Physio team. I'm Simone Muscat, the founder of the Pole Physio, and I'm joined today by, on this side I should say, by Danielle Davey. So Dani, welcome to our first episode of the Summer Series. We're really excited to have you on board. I was going to say, we'll do a little coffee cheers. So in our little
my cup disappears.
It does, doesn't it? Our virtual coffee shop. So the focus of these series is to provide free professional development to the pole and aerial community. And when we say free, we literally mean free. There is no catches to this. There is no paywall. You have access to this workshop for a very, well, not workshop, sorry, PD, for a very long time. And we'll be providing these series, quite a few of them over the next month or so, to the pole and aerial community. And it's our way of giving back to you to make sure that we're constantly building up the level of knowledge within the pole community. So we're excited to bring this to you, and I'm excited that Danielle's joining me for the first one.
Me too.
Dani is our newest but not quite newest member of the Pole Physio team. Dani's been with the Pole Physio team for at least a year now, but Dani is the newest treating therapist in the Pole Physio teams, meaning she's now taking patients worldwide for online appointments. So we're really excited to have her chat to you all today. So we're going to get right into it. So we're just going to have a nice little coffee and chat time and talk about some of our favorite topics. That's what this series is about.
Absolutely.
So, yes, just all the tea. So let's start, Dani. Let's start by talking today, in today's session, we'll talk about the foot and ankle, which I know you're super passionate about. I'll give you a little quick background. Dani is a ballet dancer as well as a pole dancer and pole instructor and aerials as well. So got quite a diverse range of experience there. But what's really interesting is the ballet and the pole backgrounds together, because there'll be some intricacies that we'll chat about, I think. So why don't you take over, chat to me about feet and ankles. Why are we talking about this topic today? What are you passionate about?
Yeah, so this is something that I'm really, really passionate about. I feel like, in the dance world, all of my ballet dancers think about their feet constantly. They do so much strength and conditioning for them, but the feet are really overlooked in pole. We do so much conditioning for basically every other body part, but we never really think about conditioning our feet. And I think that they're super, super important in pole. We might be doing choreo classes and dancing up on the ball of our foot on what we call demi-pointe. We use them a lot for landing out of flips, which are super, super common these days. Yeah, definitely. It's become a big thing the last few years. And then, of course, when we're dancing in heels as well. And then even barring all of those things, a lot of people want a really good, strong ankle point line just for aesthetics as well, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So they're pretty important in the world of pole and aerial. So we need our
so important, so underrated, so underrated.
So they do get a bit of a bad rap in terms of like training the feet. Maybe not bad rap, but like they're kind of I don't know. They're not really thought about much is probably the best way to explain it.
No, they're not. They're neglected. Yeah.
So talk to me as to what we need to know before we start training the feet.
Okay, so before we start training them, we kind of need to know probably a little bit of background anatomy. So when we're talking about pointing our foot, we're talking about what we call plantar flexion in the physio world. And that happens mostly at the ankle. But when we're looking at a pointed foot, it's more than just the ankle joint, right? So our feet, we don't really realize they actually have 33 joints and 33 muscle attachments in through the foot and ankle. So there's really a lot that we can work with there. And we're not going to go deep into the anatomy today because, that could take us all week. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that really there's a lot that we can get out of our feet if we really understand how to treat them well and how to train them. They have a lot of potential to help us out. So even if you have, people talk about, I've got weak ankles or I've got flat arches or, you've had repeated ankle sprains and that kind of thing. There is so much you can get out of your feet by training them. we think about training every other part of the body if we've got an injury or we've got a problem there, or we lack the range of motion there. But we kind of think, oh yeah, our feet are on the other end of the body. We just kind of leave them to their own devices.
Yes, they get neglected. They absolutely do. And I think a nice little comparison is we look at our hands and the dexterity we have of our fingers and the ability that we have with our grip strength and just what we have to be able to do on the pole with our arms. And so it all comes down to our fingers. We don't really use our feet in quite the same way, but they have some pretty decent potential that we're potentially not really unleashing. So I think that we could be doing a little bit more to train our feet and our toes to be a bit more powerful in the pole community, and certainly that will in turn help unleash the foot potential there. Words are escaping me today. We're going to go with that.
And we know Simone loves a good pun.
I love a good
don't
pun.
We?
Yeah, which I do. Unleash your potential. That's a little bit about anatomy. So you said that it's quite complex. I think you mentioned that there's a few different joints in the foot and lots of different muscles. So that's the anatomy of the foot. What about anatomy of pole shoes? Not going too in depth in terms of pole footwear specific, but there was this conversation last year in 2022 that was about pole dancers don't really go on point. We talk about going on point, but we don't quite go on point. And I have some thoughts and feelings towards this, and it certainly caused a little bit of a ruckus at the time. And some people may be aware of this, a lot of people probably won't be, but can you maybe break down to some degree what is on point? You might have to, sorry, I'm going for like full steam ahead there, but can you maybe talk us through what is actually on point from a ballet perspective?
Yeah, absolutely.
Demi point and on point, and then how it relates maybe to pole. Yeah,
absolutely. So when we talk about demi point in ballet, which has kind of crossed over into the pole world and lots of other worlds as well, this is when we stand up on the toes, on the ball of the foot. So we've plantar flexed or pointed at the ankle, but the toes are still on the floor. Yeah. So this is the position we go into if we're in a calf raise at the gym, for example. Really, really common. When we talk in the ballet world about being on point, we actually then press up from that demi point position to be essentially on the tip of the toes. It's not on the tip of the toes being squashed down, as a lot of people tend to think. So ballet dance, if you've ever done ballet, you will know this, but if you've never done ballet before, I brought one of my pointe shoes today. Amazing. So this is our pointe shoe. This part underneath is the shank of the shoe. So it's made of like lots of layers of leather and things like that. So it's quite pliable, but still supportive. And then this part here is called the box of the shoe, or the block of the shoe is what we stand on. So when we're going on point on a ballet shoe, we push up, do our calf raise onto demi point. So we're bending the shoe. And then from there, the toes are pushing on the inside of the shank of the shoe so that we can push ourselves up onto full point. So we're standing essentially right on the tip of the toes, but we're not crushed down on them, knuckling the toes under and scrunching them and hurting them. There's actually quite a lot of support from the box of the shoe here. So it's like a nice big hug around that forefoot and the toes. So we're not just falling down. We've actually got a lot of support using our toes and what we call the intrinsic muscles of the foot, those tiny little baby foot muscles that go to our toes, to press back against the shank of the shoe to get some support there. So obviously ballet dancers train often from a really, really young age, like 3 or 4, to strengthen their feet and their toes to work up to this. It's a really big process, and I actually do pre-point examinations for my dancers as well to make sure that they have all of the required strength and skill and technique to be able to do that safely before they get their first pair of shoes. So there's a lot to it, which is going back to that, I don't want to say argument, discussion that was being had last year. That process being so intense and ballet dancers being so skilled is why some people were a bit offended almost that we were calling dancing on our pole shoes on point. But there's also, of course, the other side of the argument. So if we're looking at pole heels, hopefully mine can stay in view.
Most of it. I was going to say.
Most of it. It's not bad.
Yeah, a bit to your left. There we go.
It's not bad. So when we talk about dancing on point there on our pole shoes, we mean when we rock forwards onto this tip of the shoe here, this front tip of the platform of the shoe, and then we can kind of rotate and move around from there. So the difference between that and doing it in the classic point shoe is the position of the actual foot and ankle. So when we tip onto point on our heel, our ankle points and plantar flexes, but we've still got this angle here at the ball of the foot. So we actually don't point the toes or the entire foot. So that's kind of where the difference lies. However, you still, if you're training your feet right and you're doing it well, we should be realistically using the same sort of muscle groups pushing back against the platform of the shoe, that footbed of the shoe, to give you some really solid support and stability there. So from that point of view, I think there's a lot of really amazing dancers that have spent a lot of time learning biomechanics and training their feet, and they are so highly proficient in this that I think to some degree it's probably fair to call it on point for them, because there is a lot of work that goes into it. So we want to respect that and appreciate that as well, because they're pretty amazing humans.
I would 100% totally agree. And I would also say that we can use the words on point and they can still actually mean different things. They can be on point of a pole shoe versus on point of a ballet shoe. So I think that we can certainly use the term, and without meaning any disrespect to ballet dancers who have obviously trained their asses off.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I just think it's on point of a pole shoe, or on the tip of a pole shoe.
Yes.
Shoe. So
yeah,
that's a little, we can still use that terminology. Yes, when we dance, we're on demi, but that's okay as long as we understand that. I think as long as instructors are aware that it's not quite the same as being on point from a classical ballet point of view, I think that as long as we're aware of that, that's the most important thing to know. I actually have the pleasure of watching in a competition last year someone actually go on point for a brief moment. They went fully over point and then back onto point to then come back up, and that was a pole dancer in their heels. So we do, as pole dancers, occasionally travel over point as we're falling down from a standing position. We actually travel over point. So we do have brief moments where we're actually weight bearing on point in the true ballet sense, but no, we don't actually spend most of our time weight bearing on point in the traditional
yeah, and they're definitely going to be different skills. I mean, we're not going to be probably pirouetting across the stage in our pole heels on point, for example. So it'll be quite a different skill from that point of view. But yeah, I think it's important to recognize that there's both similarities and differences, really.
Yeah. So yeah, differences in terms of where the weight is going through, but a lot of the similarities is that the pad of the foot where we go on demi is taking a lot of the load on both ballet in point and then pole in point. We're both taking a fair bit of the pressure through that area, and the intrinsic muscles that work all around those spots in both the ballet foot as well as the pole dancer's foot, they're both working very similar by the sounds of it.
Yeah, they are working quite similarly. Same muscles, but in a slightly different position. And we're going to learn how to work those a little bit better in a few minutes when we get onto our exercises for the day.
Yes, and he's going to show you all some exercises, which I'm excited about. So before we go into those exercises, what sort of training should we be doing for our feet?
Yes, so this is a question I get asked a lot, but I suppose maybe not as often as I would like in a way. So we often don't think about training our feet at all. But once people realize that they can train their feet and you can get so much out of it, I guess it's like any other area of the body, isn't it? So we can train our mobility, our strength, our motor control, and our awareness of our feet, just the same as any other body part. But exactly what exercises is going to really depend on the individual, like any other body part, right? So it depends on your injuries, pain, and what you want out of it. Like, do you want more range of motion to point your foot so you have a nicer line? Do you want better stability in your heels? Do you want to stop rolling your ankles? Do you want to be able to shock absorb when you land out of a flip? All of those things might have different training that's required. So lots of options.
And I'm just going to float onto that one about, do you want to stop spraining your ankles comment then? So many people go, it's just an ankle sprain. No, it's not just an ankle sprain. You have to rehab every ankle sprain that you get, because you're just going to keep on getting ankle sprains. So if you want to get on top of them, then you should definitely.
Yeah. So you don't just have weak ankles, you train them up.
Yes, exactly. All right, so let's go into these exercises then.
Yeah, let's do it.
Those onto the screen. All right, so I think you want to start with a nice.
Let's start with a classic. Okay, so calf raises, everyone. Everyone knows the good old calf raise, right? So I'm going to show you here a video that I did yesterday. This is what I hope is relatively good technique. So I'm going at a nice steady pace directly up and down for the full range of motion. So trying to go all the way to the top, lower, all the way back to the floor. There's a lot of ways, unfortunately, that we can cheat, or our bodies like to try and help us and cheat. So I'm going to go through them now as well. So bending the knee on the way up as a cheat. Very different from bending the knee on purpose. We'll talk about that in a minute. If I'm leaning forwards, I'm either doing a push-up, not a calf raise, or if I'm leaning forwards and not using my hands, I'm often using my long toe flexors, which tend to scrunch the toes instead of actually using my calf. So not training what you are expecting to be training in your calf raise, unfortunately. And then if we're looking from the back view here, we want to look at my alignment of my hips as well as my foot and ankle. So here, if you can pause that video right there. Perfect. This is, if you're looking at my foot alignment here, this is moderately okay foot alignment, but not perfect. So you can see there's a little bend between the angle of my shin and the angle of my foot and ankle there. This is what we call a sickle. So my ankle is turned in a little bit, going towards that direction that we often sprain our ankles in. So ideally, if we're doing calf raises, we should be spreading out all the toes on the floor and having all of the toes and the whole ball of the foot weight bearing equally, so that we can push up evenly with the entire calf. That's ideal technique. You're going to get the most out of it that way. So it's not dangerous to do it this way in a sickle, but it's just not ideal. You'll be missing some of the point, some of the benefits.
I was going to say, unfortunately, the viewer is kind of covering what I'm talking about, but the sickle is that bit where your weight is sitting a little bit more outside the ankle as opposed to directly on the ankle, just for anyone who didn't catch that. So this is not terrible technique, Danny. This isn't. I've seen, and I can say this in the loveliest way possible, I've definitely seen you do some better calf raises, but this is by far not your worst. So, but
I had just done my physio homework.
Oh, okay.
I'd just done a whole bunch of calf raises already, so it's a bit tired at this point.
100%. I was going to say it's better than my calf raise at the moment, so I'm not picking on you by any means. We've all got room for improvement, so that's okay.
Always.
So if I keep on playing this, we're going to shortly see a not ideal one. Is that right?
We absolutely are. Check out what my hips are doing now. This is obviously quite a, I'm doing this on purpose, so it's quite a big cheat. Yeah. But hitching the hip up, so using momentum and using the strength on the outside of the hip to create some of that lift. So I'm just not going to be getting as much out of my calf as I possibly could be here. Whoa. So we want to make sure we keep the hips fairly level.
And I've just paused the screen to compare the difference between the previous calf raise that I paused on to then this one, which really shows you really sickling. So that weight is shifted so much further out over that foot. So it's not even directly above.
Yeah.
That weight is now.
You can see it's right on the outside border of my foot there, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's pretty much over the fifth toe. So when we do a calf raise, we really want it to be over that second and third toe, which it was before. So yeah, I just wanted to pause so everyone could see that this is, and you're definitely not able to get the same height. Yeah. Oh, and
very true. You get a lot of stability from your big toe in general life, but definitely in a calf raise. So you want to be using it.
And then that last little cheat there, you're doing something else as well.
Yes, so bracing one leg on the other leg, so gaining a bit of extra stability from higher up. Yeah. We want to get that stability from the foot and ankle in our calf raise to get the most possible out of the exercise.
So just coming back to the original so calf raise directly over the second toe, and making sure that you're going straight up, not going forwards, not hitching your hips, controlling it, not too fast. The fast is the other one I see. And then they control the way up, but then they plop down. I see so many
Yeah.
cheats. So many things. So
Look, we could go on and on with the cheats. Oh yes, the bent knee.
Bent knee. Let's chat about that. So there is a difference between physios giving bent knee calf raises on purpose versus what we just saw then. So I'll go back to that bent knee one that was a little bit dodgy. This right here.
Yeah, so I'm bending the knee in order to get me up, to throw myself up, and then straightening the knee at the top. This is not ideal technique.
No, and versus an actual bent knee calf raise, which physios do quite often give. So if anyone who's listening at home or watching at home and you're like, but I've been given that exercise, it's okay. But I promise you it's okay. You've been given a bent knee exercise on purpose, but there is a difference between a bent knee calf raise versus using bending your knee as a cheating strategy for your straight leg calf raise. So yeah, that's the main thing there. Cool. All right. So that's a great first exercise. And people at home probably going, oh, calf raise, like boring.
But they're so easy to fit into your day. Do them while you clean your teeth, people. You're standing there anyway.
Absolutely. They're so easy to fit into your day. You don't need any equipment. I mean, it is nice if you can watch your feet in front of a mirror. That's my, like, as a physio, I'm like, when you first start, it's really nice too. But once you got the hang of it, all you need to do is be able to have an awareness of what's going on, where you're putting your weight through. So they're so easy to do, and they're so important, and they're the best bang for your buck foot exercise, I think, out there. Like, they will
Agreed.
not your calf, they will strengthen all of your toe, foot intrinsic muscles.
If you're doing them well.
Yeah. If you're doing them badly, then they'll end up strengthening only one side of your calf and certain parts of your muscles, and then you end up not quite right, and it can lead to long-term issues. So anyway, we won't go into that today.
So make sure you check your form anyway. We'll have someone else check your form.
So next up, I think you gave me an exercise that was to do with the toes. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is my other favorite exercise, and you can get so much out of this. It seems so simple and so low level, but it's not. So we're going to fold our TheraBand in half and half again, and we're going to wrap it around just the big toe. So making sure it's towards the end of the toe. It's not all scrunched up in that web space in between the toes. It won't do you any good there. So foot spread out flat on the floor, ankle and foot in fairly neutral position. And then we're using that TheraBand to lift the big toe up. And all you're doing is a toe tap. So pushing your toe back down to the floor, nice and straight, up and down, against that resistance. So it sounds really, really easy, right? But here's the cheat. Watch the position of my big toe now. It's coming right over to kiss my second toe. Not ideal. And my other toes were retracting or scrunching up underneath. Definitely not ideal. You're not going to get out of this exercise its full potential, certainly doing that. So we want the toes all nice and spread out flat on the floor. So you want to think flat and long. They can be a little bit engaged with the floor. That will help to get some stability through the rest of the foot, which is awesome. So you're not just training your big toe in this exercise either. But then, yeah, the hard work comes from the big toe. So trying to keep that big toe in line with the rest of that inside part of the foot. So that uses a couple of key muscles that we really want to train here. So my pet favorite is the adductor hallucis, which is a really tiny little muscle on the inside of your arch. Great big toe stabilizer, and also your FHL, or your flexor hallucis longus, for those who love their anatomy.
I do. I love it.
I think a lot of us do, don't we?
Yes, and I think my favorite part about the FHL, flexor hallucis longus, is that it has a dual role, and not many people actually understand this. Not many physios actually understand this. I imagine a lot of podiatrists do, because they're all on top of things. But flexor hallucis longus not just flexes the toe, but it also abducts the toe, which I think is really cool. So it's a key muscle that's responsible for keeping your big toe in line and stopping that kissing happening with the second toe. So that exercise there, whilst you'd be thinking it only works just the down bit, it actually is working the strengthening of the outward muscles, which is so important, because what do we do to our toes when we put them into our pole shoes?
Oh my God. Have a look at the shape of the have a look at the shape of the front of the shoe, everyone. If you stood on top of that shoe, think about the footprint of your foot versus the footprint of that shoe base there. It's much pointier here than our toes are. So hopefully our toes are not shaped this way. They should actually be quite spread at the front. So the widest point of your foot should be your toes, right? As long as they're healthy and they're strong and they're actually able to spread out on the floor and do all of their job. Yeah. So our pole shoes do the opposite of that. So we need to have some strength to actually stabilize in the shoe and not just give in to the shoe.
Yes, and that makes sense. And I want to point out it's one of the common questions I'd always get as a physio from my physio colleagues that are non-pole dancers. It's like, how the hell do you walk in those, function in those shoes? Because most of us are in 7-8 inches, potentially even bigger. But then also the shape of them, they just go, these must be so bad for you, these shoes. And I don't want to demonize pole shoes, because I actually some of the most comfortable shoes I own, and I'm sure a lot of people out there would also agree. They're super comfortable. They're made for comfort, but spending long periods of time, and if we're weak in them, can actually be detrimental for our foot. Yeah. So short periods of time, we're not going to experience too much of an issue, but longer periods of time, it might be a problem that our toes are actually being squished into a tiny shoe. Think about just even work heels, for example, with those points. If you're in
they're so pointy.
Oh, so bad. That's worse for you than pole shoes, people.
Absolutely.
8 hours in a pointy court heel or something like that, then we're in trouble. So yeah, if we're in positions like that for too long, then you're going to develop things like bunions and bunionettes and quite weak intrinsic and foot muscles as a result of it, which then perpetuates the issue. So like what Danny's saying, staying really strong with all these muscles to be able to resist that point inwards is really, really important for the health of our feet going forwards. But also important, we haven't really spoken about edge work. So all these tiny little intrinsic muscles, as well as the bigger muscles of our foot and ankle, are so important for when we go to work on the intricate movements of the foot, like in something like edge work. We spoke about sickling the foot before, and in the physio world, we use sickle as if it's a bad term, but it basically refers to the fact that we're turning our foot a certain way. And when we're doing an exercise, we don't usually want to sickle our foot, but when we do something like edge work, a lot of it is actually sickling our foot. So we need to make sure that we're super strong with all of the muscles around foot and ankle to allow for intricate movements like sickling. I've just gone on a tangent.
Yeah, absolutely. Nope. It's a great tangent. Yeah, definitely.
Just having my little tea and my thoughts. So I was going to say, if you had anything else to chat about on that, go for it. But otherwise, I'm going to bring up your next exercise.
Let's bring up the next one. I think that pretty much covers it. Yeah. So there's lots of variations of those exercises that you can do to modify and progress them to help with edge work. But of course, that's a little bit too in depth for today. So we're going to move on to the last exercise I have for you for feet and ankles. And this is to help you point your foot better, which is really going to help us with our lines, but it's also great injury prevention to learn how to do it well. So this is what we call rolling down through demi-point to full point, or articulating the foot. Very common ballet exercise that I think is really useful for us as polers. And I'm going to do a few well and then probably a few really poorly here in a second. But the idea is to plantarflex or to point through the ankle first, and then roll down and join in with the toes as well. So just the same as the previous exercise, we want the toes to stay long and straight. So as I'm pointing the toes over the top, I don't want to see any scrunching under. And I certainly don't want them to be scrunching first and then pointing the ankle either. So you might find the first time that you do this that you get some cramps in your feet or in your arch from doing this. It's quite normal because you'll be engaging a different set of muscles, those intrinsic muscles, the deep stabilizers, rather than just using the longer toe flexors that we often like to use just because they're a little easier to access. But doesn't mean they're better to be using for this exercise. Yeah. So here we go. Yeah.
A lot of people look at this and go, oh, it looks just too easy, but doing it well is different. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, your scrunching was quite impressive before, so that's not.
So this is the scrunch and then point.
No.
Doesn't really look like a good line, does it? So a lot of people see this when they're performing and don't really appreciate it very much.
Yes. And how many times do we get told to point our toes, and then what you actually see is the polar scrunch their toes?
Yeah, not point at the ankle. We've all done it.
Yes. So this is definitely one that we can work on, the ankle point and not the scrunch. Yeah. And I think building on for this, you have some recommendations of things that we don't want to be doing, or not necessarily don't want to be doing, but sometimes there needs to be some barriers maybe around them, is probably the better way to explain it. Like, they're not for everyone, these movements or exercises.
Yeah, I definitely have a couple of things that I would not recommend that most people do for their foot and ankle training, certainly. Two things we're going to talk about today. We might go straight for the TheraBand one, if you've got the video there. So it's basically the same exercise that we just showed. And it's been a really common one historically for dancers, but it's kind of merged into the pole community as well, where we're pointing our foot into a TheraBand for strengthening. So we usually use our TheraBand as resistance, right? So I point down into the TheraBand and then point my toes over the top. But while this seems like a super, super easy exercise, because, you know, when we're not standing up or anything like that, we're just pointing into a TheraBand, it's really hard to do this exercise well. So if everyone tries this at home, try pointing into your TheraBand and not scrunching your toes. It is really, really hard, really difficult. So when we point into the TheraBand, ideally we would be strengthening both the ankle and the intrinsic muscles by pointing those toes down nice and long and straight, like the previous video. But because the TheraBand is kind of squishing the toes there a bit, it's not only going to squish them together, it's also going to help make you want to curl them under. So that causes a couple of problems. It trains your long flexor muscles that we don't really want to train quite as much as some of the other muscles. So you'll be more likely to scrunch your toes and have a non-ideal line when you point. But it's also going to make it harder to stabilize in your shoe. And it can actually create some problems at the back of the ankle, some pain at the back of the ankle. Yeah, right in there. Yeah. So our long flexor tendons pass by the back of the ankle there, and we can create some tendon pain there, which often people come in and see me and they think they've got an Achilles problem. But actually there's a load of stuff at the back of the ankle, not just the Achilles. So that's one of the pains that you can have there. And also pointing into the TheraBand tends to change the mechanics of how we point our foot. So we actually get a fair bit of joint compression at the back of the ankle there. We can actually end up with some impingement pain at the back of the ankle joint. Also not ideal.
Yeah. So I look at this exercise and I go, there's very few people out there who could do it very well. So them, and like, I mean, at Australian ballet level, like they've got some really good control around their foot. But do they need to do it? No, very few people need to do an exercise like this. If you're trying to use this to improve your point, there are so many better ways to improve your point.
Yeah.
Strengthen your calf, your Achilles area, your deeper stabilizing muscles of the back of the calf. All of them can be strengthened through your calf raises, and when done correctly, it will just be so much more bang for your buck than that exercise there. And then if you're trying to work on the aesthetics of the point, then you can do it by the previous exercise you showed, as well as a whole bunch of other foot intrinsic strengthening exercises that would just do so much more than that particular.
Yeah. So really I would pick something else so that you're making the most of your time, because we've got so many other things that we want to be conditioning on the pole. We don't want to spend all day doing foot exercises. So
I mean, they're pretty fun. They're frustrating. They're those exercises. I love them. I love to hate them. They're those exercises where you're like, why is this so hard to do? To just
a lot of brain power.
Why is it moving? How do I stop it moving? A lot of brain power, those exercises. But yeah, no, they're What was the
so that's the first one I wouldn't necessarily recommend for everybody. The second one is any passive stretching to try and improve your point range. So how far you can point your foot and your toes down. So there's a lot of ways that I've seen out there that people try and stretch the front of their foot and ankle to improve how far they can point their foot. You see people sitting on their feet. They might even put blocks or rollers under their toes to elevate themselves a bit more. This is probably a bit more in the ballet world, but I'm sure some pole dancers have probably done it too, shoving their feet under the couch and then trying to push down their knee so that they're essentially squishing their oh my goodness, those poor tortured feet. And there's also some devices that we can use that are out there these days called foot stretchers. I'm not going to show a picture of them or anything, but if you want to Google it to see what I mean, if you haven't seen them before, they look like torture devices.
Not give people too many ideas.
No, that's fair. But yes, so I would generally, this is one area of the body that I wouldn't recommend passive stretching, definitely. So there are so many joints in through the foot and the ankle, and so many tendon structures and ligaments that we don't want to overstretch those and create any areas of instability. Because basically, if we're stretching an area passively, what's going to give is going to be the point of least resistance, right? So probably the part that's already most bendy. So that's why in the foot in particular, I don't love passive stretching on its own, because there are so many joints and so many ligaments that we might be stretching. We're probably going to stretch the ones that are most stretchy already. So it's going to make an uneven line and create instability at that area without gaining you any strength to make it actually a functional movement. So when you go up the pole and you want your beautifully pointed foot, you haven't really developed the strength or the motor control to actually access that anyway. So again, it's not really possibly the best use of your time.
Yeah.
As well as we can create some other injuries at the back of the ankle. Again, that ankle impingement at the back of the ankle joint, just because we're compressing that joint as far as it'll go, which is not the most fun.
No, not at all. So I guess like everything, there are always exceptions to the rules, and there's very few exceptions to this rule from my perspective. So if you're a person out there who thinks that you'd benefit from passive stretching the foot, I would really recommend getting clearance from a healthcare professional first, preferably physio or osteochiro that has some experience with dancers' feet. Lovely Danny, for example. So that's great. Lovely Danny, perfect person to go to. But there are certain exceptions, but particularly like stiff feet, not because you're just naturally a stiff person, but things that are like post-surgical stiffness, which may benefit from stretching of some sort. But again, it would be a case-by-case scenario. So if anyone out there who's just like, but it feels so nice when I stretch it, yes, but we can promise you that that temporary feeling of niceness, if pushed too far, can be detrimental long term, particularly as polars. We have a very hypermobile population in our community. So if a hypermobile polar was happening to be pushing their point into a certain direction that they didn't have access to already, it could be quite disastrous in the short and long term. But even for the non-hypermobile polars, it's really important to be aware that we could be causing some serious issues if we're not careful. So I would just say it's not a hard no, but it's definitely a please don't try this one at home until you're with some medical clearance. Yeah.
And even if someone was coming to see me to improve their ankle range, there are so many things that you can do to improve it without having to go to that particular one. It's kind of the last thing on the list that I would try almost.
Absolutely. I understand. Yeah, I would be doing everything else first that we could do before we start passively loading the joint, because as soon as you start putting force through any sort of ligamentous tissue, we talk about creep, which is where the ligament stretches out to a point of no return, so you're not actually going to regain any of that tensile strength back into the ligament, so you're causing permanent structural damage. So we need to be so cautious and aware of this over time.
Especially if we're then wanting to go in our pole shoes and dance on point, we're pushing in to the front of the ankle there already. Yes. So we need to be strong there, not overstretched there.
Yeah, we want to be strong and stable. We want strong.
Trust me, you don't want it.
Yeah, we want mobile ankles, but we don't want we want mobile ankles, but we don't want mobile ankles that are unstable. We want mobile and strong, and that's the key. So just like with any sort of stretching of any other part of our body, we want mobile hips, we want mobile shoulders, but we don't want unstable shoulders or unstable hips. I know I'm banding around that word unstable at the moment, which is a very hard thing to create, but as a general sort of blasé term there, we don't want any injuries happening.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask, are there any takeaways from today?
Oh, look, I could talk about feet all day, but honestly, if you could get one thing out of this today, do not forget your feet. Yeah, do not forget them. They're not just an added appendage like that just sits there and does nothing. You can train them, and you can get a whole load of potential out of them if you give it a go.
Yeah.
You can always improve that foot function, just knowing your anatomy and knowing what your foot needs. So yeah, if you need any help finding that out, you can always book an appointment with one of us online. Happy to help. But yeah, don't forget your feet.
Yes. As I say, we've got obviously now with you on board, it's so exciting. So we've got very passionate therapists with us now in Danny. Not that we're not all passionate, I'm very passionate, but very passionate foot and ankle based therapist. And you've also got many other passions as well in the body. I know hip is another area that you're super passionate about. So I'm excited to have you back in a couple of weeks' time to talk about the hip. So I'm looking forward to recording that session with you, so definitely looking forward to that, but also I know that you're super passionate about hypermobile bodies, being hypermobile yourself, and just many other injuries that we obviously experience as pole dancers. So for anyone out there who's watching and you're like, I think I need to see Danny, you can. So if you are injured, if you're not injured, and you've got some goals that you want to work towards, like making your lines a little bit more beautiful, or if you want some more control around your foot so you can start working on things like edge work, side note here, I'd suggest that anyone who really wants to take edge work seriously and get into it, you should almost have a foot and ankle assessment for edge work, like what we do for ballet, for pointe. I would actually recommend that would be really helpful to start screening. That was a little side note there. For those of you who are not into edge work, that's fine. Don't need a foot.
Even point work on your heels, honestly. Yeah. While it's not necessarily always ballet level, it's still a very high level skill.
Very high level. So absolutely. So so bookings with Danny are now available online via our website, www.thepolephysio.com. Click on the book online link and it will take you there. So anyone worldwide can see Danny, with a little asterisk there, except US patients, unfortunately, due to your own legislation. That's not our fault. Sorry about that. But for those US patients, we do have Jake available for you to see. So don't worry, you don't miss out completely. You're still able to see one of our therapists, which is exciting. But for everyone else, if you're US, you're Asian based, Asia, Australia, I've got a very grumpy dog in the background, don't know if you can hear it. If you are in Europe somewhere, anywhere in the world other than US, you are very welcome to book in to see Danielle via our website. So very excited to have you on board.
Yeah, very excited to meet a bunch of new people and work one-on-one.
Awesome. So I'm going to wrap up our first day of summer series right now. Thank you so much for joining us. Very, very happy to have you back in a couple of weeks' time. So for everyone else out there, make sure you stay tuned for Danny's second part. We're looking forward to having her back soon.
Me too. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.